Hello and welcome to the first lettering demo that we're going to show you. And we're going to show you how we letter comic books using Adobe Illustrator. So we would launch Adobe Illustrator and we're going to create comic balloons very similar to the ones that you kind of see here. Now this demo is just basically showing you how we do the actual comic book balloons. We're going to go into another demo entirely that shows you actually how we start lettering the comic book itself. So the first thing I want to do with Illustrator is open. I'm just going to go ahead and open a new file. And I'm going to set it to a letter size, meaning just a standard sheet of paper that's 8.5 by 11, and it's portrait size, meaning it's going to be vertical, not horizontal. And there it creates my page. Now, there's a couple of different tools that I'm going to be using in here. The first one that I'm going to show you is actually right over here in my tool palette. I have a feature that I can create standard shapes. This is the first palette that I'm going to want to use from. And this little handlebar right here is my tear off. And if I click and hold on it, it actually will create and show me actually all their shapes. The next thing that I'm going to also be using is the pen tool. And I'll also be using a variety of other tools, particularly to move it and stretch it and distort it in some sort of way. Now there's different types of balloons that we can create. There's narrative, there's dialogue, and then there's thought. Narrative are usually our boxes that we see. And with the box tool, I can create a variety of different shaped boxes that I can then put in narrative dialogue. Another palette I'm going to be using is the stroke palette. The black line that you see around the box is the stroke. Generally speaking, we want that to be at least 2 points in weight so that it's thick enough that I can see it and not quite so thin that it disappears. So as a general rule of thumb, we're going to want those to be 2 points in weight. I can also create my normal ellipse, which is the standard kind of dialogue that you would see. But how do I create that little tail on the end of it that shows me which characters are speaking? Well, that's where the pen tool comes in. If I click on the pen tool allows me to create customized shapes. So I can create a little triangle here that shows me that that's the direction that I want the character to speak. But say I don't want this kind of awkward little setting here, and if I go to move it, notice how the tail doesn't move with it. What I want to actually do is take this triangle shape and this ellipse shape and make them all one big shape. And the way I do that is under Window, I'm going to scroll down and select Pathfinder. And what the Pathfinder tool does for me is that if I select both of these shapes, so now I have the ellipse and the triangle both selected, I can unify them into one shape, like so. And now when I click and move it, it's its own dialogue balloon. This little white arrow tool allows me that if I click on the shape, I can see these points that are around it. These points are what create the actual shape. And when I pass that arrow over it, a little dot appears. You see that little dot next to the arrow? That means the mouse is right over one of those points, and that if I click, it goes from white to a solid blue. See how now it's a solid blue and these are white. It means this guy is selected and the computer is waiting for me to tell what I want to do with that point. Well, in this particular case, I'm going to select down here so that I can drag and change the shape of the tail, or I can move the tail to wherever I want it to be. I can also do the same approach with other shapes. So say I want to create a dialogue balloon that's a round-edged square. It's 2 points in weight. I'm going to take my pen tool, again create me a triangular shape, And then I'll select both of the shapes, and in my Pathfinder, I'll unite them. Now, dialog boxes or narrative boxes that have dialogue in them or narrative text usually don't have one of the tails, and that's what this is actually called, a tail, to denote speaking. It's just your narrative where you would see stuff like the words meanwhile or things like that. Dialogue, of course, is the dialogue between the two characters, and our tail denotes how they're who's speaking what. And of course, we can create some customized shapes as well that show and help sell a particular mood, like maybe if you have a robot or something, that they might talk in more of this kind of very structured sort of dialogue box. I can also create bursts. If I select my star tool here, if I start to click and drag, it will create, if I customize it, a burst. And if I click on it and then just click on the actual page, it will allow me to customize that starburst so that I can adjust its radius and how many points that it has. And with my white arrow, the direct select tool, and floating over the points, I can then change and adjust the points so that it starts looking more like a burst rather than something in particular for dialogue here. And that can give me an actual burst sound effect. I could use this for dialogue as well. And just like my regular dialogue boxes, I can manipulate the direction of the tail however I want it to go. I can also change the size of these shapes. Just by clicking on them, you'll see a bounding box appears around them. Right under our little eraser tool, I have the scale tool that allows me to stretch and twist these shapes. So I can stretch it and make it bigger if I need to. Say I just want to change this shape, but I want to leave the tail as it is. This only works with shapes that I've united under the Pathfinder feature, but I take my white arrow tool and I just click on the shape that I want to change. Then, with my bounding box, I can change the shape of it. Then I can come back and adjust my tail if I want. And this will allow me to fit more text. Now, a general rule of thumb is that you can create a bunch of these different kinds of shapes and have you a template that you could use. Like so. That you can literally then just create these shapes and copy and paste them and use them as pre-made shapes. So say I want to create a shape that's a thought balloon. Well, I would start with the ellipse tool and just draw myself a regular shape like this. And then I might draw several other shapes of different sizes and shapes around them. And I'm going to want these shapes to kind of overlap one another. And see how it overlaps a little? And I just want them to overlap. And there's really no method to the madness as far as this goes. You just want the different shapes. And I'm going to go all the way around and create these shapes. So I've now surrounded my circle with a bunch of other little circles that I can then select all of these items like so, and then I can unite them. And there it creates me a little thought cloud. And then of course I can use my ellipse tool again to create smaller ellipses. That'll help me indicate that I can move around, that help me indicate who's thinking this thought. And if I want them all to be together, if I select and hold my shift key down and select each of these little circles as well, I can go to Object and group them together so that it's all now one group when I click on it, and then it will move as one group wherever I want it to go. So again, that's basically how we can create shapes. And again, it's also recommended that you create you kind of templates of ones that you can use. You can experiment with brush strokes. And under our brushes palette, we can create customized effects by opening up and using some of the more interesting line strokes that allow me to create some customized effects of things. And again, remember, we're trying to create certain illusions here that help us sell the dialogue and help set the mood as well. So we may create some customized ones that create some specialized looks, because maybe you have a particular type of character that you want to call attention to their dialogue to help set your mood. And then you can set up and save a bunch of these files so that you can just literally copy and paste whatever it is that you want to do in into a pre-made balloon. So that's pretty much how we create our word balloons for our dialogue, and this is how we use Illustrator in order to do that. And so we'll go into a couple of other different examples using how we letter the actual comic book using a variety of different softwares.